Hello again.
Hello.
Yeah. So today we're coming to our main dish, so to speak. That lesson number 4, and we'll talk about question the on the $2 billion question. Do the Quran and the Torah come from the same author? Because that's basically the claim of Muhammad, who said that he came from as a prophet from the same God who gave Torah to Musa and Injil to Isa, and Zabur to Dawood, and even scrolls to Abraham. But it's questionable. Anyway, so that's number one question, I think, in the general. And we're gonna show you why it's very important, not only because claim of Muhammad, but also what we find in the Quran as how many verses in the Quran is uh, relates to that subject, right? First of all, Quran has 6,236 ayats or verses. Out of them, entire like stories of Old Testament, retelling the stories of Old Testament, they are 1,091 verse, which is 17.5 roughly percent of the entire Quran. 17.5% of the Quran is retelling the stories of the Old Testament, and only 113 verses about New Testament. Out of them, 69 about Jesus only. But look how much of about the Torah. From the Torah, from Adam to Moses, 987 verses. It's by far, it is the most mm, taught by Muhammad, because he likes, for example, Moses. He talks a lot about it. He talks about Joseph, Abraham, Noah, and we're gonna share something which is you could effectively use in a short conversation with a Muslim. And this one will be basically, I make a claim that we have to make a Torah great again. So we're not going to talk about New Testament. We're not going to talk about doctrines. We're not going to talk about Muhammad's morality or Quran's morality. We're going to compare the stories as it depicted in the Quran and as it depicted in the Torah, and it will reveal a lot to the Muslim friend, of course. So the master key consists of 6 points. The first, we talked about it before, the confirmation of the Torah. The Quran actually confirmed the Torah. Second one now we're dealing today is a Torah. The Torah and the Quran came from the same author. And this is second pillar, what we call it, of Islam. Islam is held down on 5 pillars. So, and Muslims believe that God revealed the Torah and the Quran. Of course, they usually say the original Torah, right? But as in the previous lectures, we spent all this time in previous lectures to prove that the Torah in the times of Muhammad was reliable and could not be corrupt. So now coming to that question again, because that's what I ask Muslims on the street. Do the Quran and the Torah come from the same author? And let's hear the two clips, one from the Christian and one from Muslim.
I want to tell you, my sisters and brothers, and I really mean what I say, I do believe that we are all God's family, and that we must respect each other, because Muslims and Christians have so much together. Abraham, Moses, Elijah, and even Jesus.
Another thing that they did was they attempted to trick him by asking him questions that they thought he could not answer. And they primarily did this by getting questions from the Yahud. Because the concept of prophecy was not known to the Arabs. They really did not have a concept of somebody communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they knew the Jews believed in this. So they went to them a number of times. And Surah Al-Kahf was revealed because of this. And Surah Isra was revealed because of this. And so the questions were, and Surah Yusuf was revealed because of this, right? All of these surahs came down because of these questions. That the Jews said, go and ask him about the Prophet Joseph. What does he know about Joseph? And so Allah revealed in the Qur'an all of Surah Yusuf. The Jews said to them, ask him about the Ruh. What is the Ruh? وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Right? The Yahud said, ask him about Dhul Kifl. Ask him about, Dhul Qarnayn. Dhul Qarnayn. What does he know of Dhul Qarnayn? And so, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed about Dhul Qarnayn. And they kept on asking. And whatever they asked, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to them. And this again shows us the knowledge that he had. And the greatest miracle in this was that the knowledge of these prophets was not known to the Arabs. Because the Arabs have no lineage with Joseph. The Arabs have no lineage with Moses, with Dhul Qarnayn. What has this got to do with them? The Arabs had no knowledge of any of these prophets and their stories. And there are no books, as we know, there are no libraries. And Mecca is not a center of civilization. Yet, when the Prophet ﷺ is asked about the story of Joseph, and the Quranic story is so similar to the narrative to this day in the Old Testament that it is amazing. It is amazing how this person in the middle of nowhere without any access to any book can basically dictate the entire story. And Allah references in the Qur'an that you did not know these stories before the Qur'an came down. And by the way, let me just tell you, within academia, this is one of the biggest challenges that to this day people try to decipher. Where did the Prophet ﷺ get this knowledge from? Of course, we know it came from Allah, but believe me, this is something they have so many attempts and so many theories and so many things to do. I don't want to go into my tangents right now.
Yeah, that's I love this clip.
So similar to this day.
Yeah, so we heard from Christian, from Muslim, who basically both of them said, well, one way or another, Christian said we have so much together. We have Abraham, Moses, even Jesus, and of course, if Abraham and Jesus are common between Christian and Muslims, of course, Joseph is also common. And Yasser Qadi, I call him my sheikh, because I learn a lot from him. Especially I learn the life of Muhammad. I listen to all his 105 lectures. It's amazing resource for non-Muslim and probably for Muslims as well. So I have a great deal of respect of him, but he doesn't know the Torah. And he made a mistake. And I'm going to show you how about that mistake. And there is, by the way, there are a number of Muslims who will make such a mistake because they don't simply have a knowledge. They didn't read Torah and the Quran side by side. So today we're going to touch a little bit of the story of Joseph. And before that, I would like to read from the book, Towards Understanding Islam. It said, with regard to their religious belief, meaning Arabs, they suffered from the same shortcomings which were playing havoc with the rest of the world. They worship stones, trees, idols, stars, and loose spirits. In short, everything conceivable except God. They did not know anything about the teaching of the prophets of old. They had an idea that Abraham and Ishmael were their forefathers, but they knew next to nothing about their religious teaching and about the word and about God, whom their distant ancestors worshipped. The stories of the ancient tribes of Ad and Tamud were to be found in their folklore, but they contained no traces of the teaching of prophets Hud and Saleh. The Jews and the Christians had transmitted to them certain legendary folk tales relating to the Israelite prophets. but they presented a rather bleak picture of those noble souls. The stories were adulterated with the figments of their imagination. So, idea is before Prophet Muhammad came to Arabs, they have some very vague knowledge of prophets. They heard of something about Abraham and Ishmael, maybe about Moses and about Jesus, right? But they have very, as I said, bleak picture, not much. And now Prophet Muhammad coming, and what his what his how come his story about the same prophets are different from the folklore of Arabs? He has more details in it, not just general information, but detailed version of the story.
And
That's why it's important.
it seems
Yes.
like what he's saying here in the book too is that maybe there was some folk tales going around, but what Muhammad's going to present is like the accurate stories.
Yes, exactly. Accurate, very much, very detailed story. And
Which
yes, I agree with that. If he is bringing detailed story, we should dive into it, right? And we're gonna
and
start looking at details.
it should match with the scriptures, not with the legends, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by the way, we don't know what kind of legends they were. Like we can guess because nobody had written down, as far as I know, the old Arabs legends, how they understood the prophets. We don't know. But nevertheless, here's a short version uh, of the methodology, how to and what to use from the Quran and from the Torah. We have a longer one, definitely, and we're gonna record it in a separate video. But this is a short one for the street specifically when your time is limited. So this is a story of Joseph, and actually is a second part of when you take the whole story of Joseph and separate it by parts, it will be part number two. And the jealous of the Joseph's brothers and the plot to kill Joseph. So we're gonna read from the Quran, Surah 12, 16 to 18, two verses, and Genesis 37, 32 to 35. So here it's what is said.
So you want me to read?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So in Surah 12, 16 to 18, then they, that's the brothers of Joseph, then they returned to their father in the evening, weeping. They cried, Our
Sorry.
Father. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Okay, they cried, Our Father, we went racing and left Joseph with our belongings, and a wolf devoured him. But you will not believe us, no matter how truthful we are. And they brought his shirt stained with false blood. He responded, No, your souls must have tempted you to do something evil. So I can only endure with beautiful patience. It is Allah's help that I seek to bear your claims.
Thank you. Now, Genesis.
And they, the brothers, sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna remove all the verse which are surrounding most important ones. We're gonna keep the most important one, right? So in the Quran, they return to father in the evening weeping, and they said the wolf devour him, but you will not believe us because we tell you the truth, but you don't trust us. And he said, Of course I don't believe you. Well, in the Torah, it's opposite. They come to father and they present the shirts in they say, This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified and he said, It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt and torn to pieces. And he mourned for his son many days. And he refused to be comforted because for many, many days he was weeping, and his father wept for him for a long time, right? So we could see completely different uh, depiction of the same story, exactly the same story. So according to the Quran, brothers told their father that Joseph was dead, and his father accused the brothers of lying. According to the Torah, the brothers did not tell their father that Joseph was killed. Jacob concluded on his own accord that Joseph was dead. According to the Quran, the brothers were crying about Joseph's demise, not their father. Well, according to the Torah, it's opposite. Joseph's father cried over his death. The brothers did not cry and were unsuccessfully trying to comfort him. So we have two completely contradictory pictures. In the Quran, the brothers are crying. Then they came to father. Well, in the Torah, father is crying. So either one or like one or another. We don't decide jumping on it. We have a contradictory story. So, but that's not the end of the story. If we're gonna go back to the future, to the end of the story, the time when Joseph reunite with his brothers in Egypt. So the Quranic passage and the biblical passage will be follow their own narrative path. So let's see. Surah 12, 94 to 96.
Okay. Yeah, I can read it. So, when the caravan departed from Egypt, their father said to those around him, "You may think that I'm senile, but I certainly sense the smell of Joseph." They replied, "By Allah, you are definitely still in your old delusion." But when the bearer of the good news arrived, he cast the shirt over Jacob's face, so he regained his sight. Jacob then said to his children, "Did I not tell you that I truly know from Allah what you do not know?"
And here's the Genesis.
It says, "So they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob, and they told him, 'Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt.' And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel, that is Jacob, said, 'It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.'"
So here we have again two different reactions. Quran is following the same story of the beginning of this, when father reject the idea that Joseph is dead because brothers told him Joseph died. His father, their father didn't believe him. So, and he said, did I not tell you before years ago that I truly know from Allah what you don't know?" In the Torah, it's opposite. It's it's actually continuation of the story depicted in the beginning in the Torah, when father recognized that Joseph is dead by his own desire, like the way he saw the shirt, and he thought he convinced himself that Joseph is dead. Brothers never told him that Joseph is dead. In the Quran, they said it explicitly because they took the Joseph with him, with them in the morning of that same day, and returned without him. So they're responsible. They took responsibility for his death, for the negligence which led to his death. In the Bible, it's a completely different story. In the Bible, they're coming to the father and saying, "We didn't find the Joseph, we didn't see Joseph, but we find a shirt on the street, on the road." And the father concluded on his own accord that Joseph is dead. 23 years pass by, and they're coming back to the father, and they saying Joseph is still alive and he's a ruler of over all the land of Egypt. And what it said, and his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. So that's very important difference, as we see, right? So it's totally different story. and yet there is no way to reconcile it, right? So what we show it to you is basically the number of differences in just the story of dreams, which we didn't touch today. There are 28. When we go for the brothers execute their plot, which we talk about it a little bit touched today, it's like already 79 differences. We go more, and we have, by the time they're coming to the Father with a bloody shirt, it's 108 differences. So it's a lot of details that are different from between the Torah and the Quran. And the two stories are incompatible. They sound like alike. The main points are alike and it's almost the same, right? So when I say that Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, he ended up in Egypt, he was falsely accused, he was sent to prison, he explained the dreams to two prisoners, it came to pass, and then he was forgotten. Then Pharaoh or king saw the dreams. Then Joseph was brought to him. Joseph explained his dreams, and he became the uh, prime minister of Egypt. And then his brothers came in. They didn't recognize him. He recognized them. He put them to test eventually and asked for younger brother to come. He planted the cup in his brother's younger brother sack and pull them back into themselves. And eventually, he he showed himself to the brothers. They have a reunion, and he asked to bring all the family, and all Jacob's family came to Egypt. We just what I said right now, it's perfectly fit both the Torah and the Quran in general terms. The problem starts when you go into details, and you can see their stories completely incompatible. And I want to play that short clip now again by Yasser Qadi, just to remind what he said in the beginning.
Joseph and the Quranic story is so similar to the narrative to this day in the Old Testament that it is amazing. Joseph.
So, as I said, not many Muslims or even Christians know about the main problem between the Quran and the Bible, generally speaking. It's a story comparison. So when we compare the stories and we're gonna really look into details of each story, we'll find hundreds and hundreds of differences, which will tells us that these two books have different authors. By definition, there is no way they're coming from the same author, because it's not minor difference, it's the minor and major differences in every single story which we are taught of from Old Testament and New Testament. As a matter of fact, that when you bring anything about Mary, John the Baptist, or Jesus from the Quran, they have absolutely no connection between the New Testament scripture. It's all come from apocryphal sources. Concerning the Old Testament, it sounds like from the Torah, but it's not. And later on, we're gonna have more detailed lessons about most important, I should say, the subject, which not many Muslims ever know about it. But it's very important for me and for us, I believe, to share before them. Then they have a problem. They have religion. They believe in a book which is definitely not written, not given, not revealed by the God who revealed the Torah. This is impossibility. There are too many differences. So therefore, I think I could say that that the Torah, or the argument of the Torah comparatively, like to compare with the Quran, is like an like big huge elephant in the mosque. Everybody try to avoid it, try to not pay attention. And I understand why the Muslims not doing it. I don't understand why Christians not pressing the issue, because this is number one, in my opinion, the issue. When we start comparing the stories, we see the radical problems of the Quran. So it's way bigger than any other topics we can discuss. It's theology or morality or anything else. This is or preservation of the Quran. It's a small issue compared to this one. Compared to this huge elephant, the issue is small. So, but now, right now, lecture is done, and basically, this Torah, what it does, it just takes a pillar, second pillar of Islam, which Muslims believe that God or Allah revealed the Torah and the Quran, and we just use the Torah to dismantle that pillar completely. There is no way to any Muslims who continue believe or stress the point that Torah and the Quran came from same God. Therefore, there's a big problem for them. And I also have another analogy as a Titanic and the iceberg, and the Torah is definitely will not gonna let Titanic go to destination port, and it will inevitably goes down. So that's end of our short lecture, and let's go
Should probably
this way.
discuss it a little bit.
Let's discuss it. Yep.
Yeah, so that's great. So I think you explained it well. I think maybe what would be helpful is to kind of come back over it from the angle of, okay, actually like doing it with them, right? So like since we've got a number of lectures, let's try to connect it, like flow it through. So essentially in the actual conversation with the Muslim, we've raised the questions about, do you believe the Torah has been changed? When? Let's show you verses from the Quran about the Torah. Then we went through those verses, and then we showed them the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now we're at this point, right? So in some ways, like the clips and things are very helpful for us to learn about the issues and why it's very important. We won't always be able to do the clips, right? With
Oh,
the
yeah.
person. So it's just like boiling it down to, you're on the street. So how do you go from, okay, you showed them some verses in the Quran about the Torah, you brought up the Dead Sea Scrolls, we did a video on that,
Yeah.
and now go right from that point into what we're doing now. So what would you say to them?
Well, usually transition is from when I show the Quranic passages about the preservation of the Torah and days of Muhammad, then I show this scrolls, and I ask him like, "What do you think? Like, do you believe that the Torah was not corrupt? That this Torah in my hands? I mean, just I have a Bible, I have a Tanakh in my hand. Ask him like, can you say it's not corrupted?" A majority of Muslims will say reluctantly, well, not reluctantly, they say, well, I'm not sure. Okay. Some will deny it right away. Some will say, yes, not corrupted. And then I've said, okay, fine, thank you. But then I have a second question for you. And I go to that question: do the Torah and the Quran came from same author? And they say, yes. And now I show them difference. Like we read together. So I open the Bible, or I open the book, Quran Bible comparison. It's easy to navigate,
Okay.
and I ask him to read, or I read for them both passages, and I tell him, "Is it? Do you think it's compatible?" And all of them, I think it was only one exception who said, "No, I think it's the same." Well, maybe two exceptions if I remember, but like everybody else said, "No, they're not compatible," and that's that story of the Joseph being sold by brothers and brothers coming to father and showing the shirt. In both cases, they are the most, I think, short and the most powerful evidence to make my point. And the Quran has different author than the Torah.
Right.
And
Right.
as I said, except maybe two people who eventually agree. I make them agree. Of course, it's illogical to say it otherwise. Everybody else right away say, "Oh yeah, that's different," and that's the first time you see the shock. The first question when we ask about, do you think the Torah I have in my hands is corrupt word of God? Yes, no. That's not the shocker. So they think it's probably get corrupted, and no matter what I show them, they will come back and say, "Well, I think it's still corrupted, but how do I know, right?"
Hmm. Hmm.
But then I show that differences. So if a corruption starts there,
Yeah.
it is right here.
Yeah.
The variant is huge, right?
Yeah. Because you're going from basically, they could kind of have it hypothetical in their mind. Like, well, I don't know. Like, I guess we're talking in general, right?
Yeah,
But now you're showing them, no, but here's how it's different.
yeah,
And now they're seeing it for themselves or reading it for themselves. Yeah, I think it's important that they read it. So the way you've done it with the book you publish is that's great. I think just kind of the way that I've done it, not using that book, but more just okay. So I usually would just transition. I don't normally ask them to like affirm
yeah.
that the Torah is reliable or not. I'll just I'll just kind of read their reaction, and
Hmm.
then I say, okay, so because basically I've been leading up to it, especially because maybe also because you don't always use the same verses as I do for affirming the Torah, but because I'm methodically kind of ending on the points with Surah 12, 111, right, and 1094 before that, right, and sometimes 12:3 before I go into,
Yeah,
well, I skip, like, mention the Dead Sea Scrolls and then I go into the stories. How we go into the stories after the Dead Sea Scrolls is kind of a seamless transition from those verses about the stories, confirming the stories. So I'll just simply say, okay, so I want to show you and some examples of parts of stories. Okay, and then I just go to open to Surah 12, 16 to 18 and read it. They read it, and usually I'll just say, okay, so what happened there,
hmm,
and get them to say what happened, and then I say, okay, so then I'll bring out an English Bible, and I'll explain to them, okay, so our modern English Bibles, not like the King James, but our modern English ones draw upon those oldest manuscripts for translation, so we can just open and read it, right? So I want to show you a few examples of stories. Um, and if time is really sensitive, a few short examples.
yeah,
Okay. And this would be the short example in that case. So they read the thing in the Quran. We establish clearly what it says very briefly, so I might guide them in saying, okay, so how did the father react when he saw the bloody shirt? Did he believe them? Did he not believe them? Do you think that Jacob thought that Joseph was alive or dead? And sometimes they kind of waffle on it, and they'll say, "Well, I'm not really sure. It doesn't really say."
hmm.
Usually, they'll think he's alive,
Okay,
and because it's clear in the Quran, he thinks he's alive.
yeah,
Not clear at that point, but from the rest of the context, which you showed with the later verses at the end of the surah.
yeah. That's why it's
So,
important to show right away the end of
right.
the
So
story.
then you can show that, right? Okay. So this will clarify that he definitely thought he was alive. Then we go to Genesis and get them. I'll give them, or I'll hold it and have them read it aloud. And I think it's a good habit of getting them, like you do
Yeah,
with the current Bible
yeah.
book, get them to read it themselves and see it themselves is very important because they never read it. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good practice. And so simply what I just do is I want to show you a few examples of stories to try to get in without kind of minimize any kind of deflecting away from it.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's kind of how I approach it.
Now it's very interesting that this is only one story out of few hundreds.
Oh yeah.
So in other lessons, we're gonna expand on them. So what happens is if when you learn it, it will be like extra tools in your toolbox. When you read the Muslim, he understood it and he already like in the verge of cracking down. So
Hmm.
you might not need to add more stories, right? But if he or she's still holding on, so you
Hmm.
add one story extra and maybe another, maybe 10 stories, whatever your time is, right?
Yeah.
It's times allowed because we do street evangelism together, separately as well. We do also we meet Muslims in the coffee shops as well. So it's different
Mhm.
settings.
Yeah.
Well, like on a coffee shop, I have like I pull and you do the same thing. We put a bunch of books on a table, and we have a longer, more thorough conversation. But on
Yeah.
the street, it must be everything should be concise and fast.
Yeah.
And the lecture basically we're gonna equip you guys to learn how to do both and a long conversation. When you know how to do long conversation, you know how to do short one, and you're
Yeah.
gonna
So
judge it on
yeah, and this is the short. So basically, um, the short is essentially want to show you an example of a story, or you can ask the question: do you believe that the
yeah.
Torah and the Quran have the same author? And then okay, so then in that case, I want to show you something from both, and something parallel.
And then he asked question again, the same. Do you
Mhm.
believe the Torah and Quran came from same author? And they said
Mhm.
no. Or I would say that does the stories come from the same author? They
Right.
said no, because it's common sense. It's logically, right?
You're right. You're right.
So basically, I make them say yes, and then I make them say no at the end,
Mhm.
right? And the rest we have three more questions to ask,
Mhm.
and we're gonna show in the next lectures about that, not diving into the different topic, but it is like a mine, like we just dig a little bit, but we can go down and we can dig a lot. And the story of
Mhm.
Joseph, it's like amazing. You can spend hours and hours talking to Muslims,
Mhm.
like going thoroughly to the every single details and explaining them and comparing them and showing them how Quran depicts it a different way than the Torah depicts. Same thing we have with Moses, with Abraham. We have even Job is an amazing story. It's not the Torah, but nevertheless it's Old Testament. Or Jonah. Its story is something which is very interesting. The Muslims don't know this stuff. This is interesting part, and you have something they have a knowledge of the facts they have no idea about. So
Yeah.
you surprise them.
And no one's talking about it.
Yeah, and nobody's talking about it. Now, the interesting part is like they might not be convinced at the meeting with you. Let's say you have only one meeting. Most of the time, I had one meeting and I never seen them again, right?
Mhm.
But I leave that very important information to them to consider. They coming home, if they're serious about their religion and they want to refute my argument because they couldn't refute it on the street or in a coffee shop. So they're coming home and now they could do their research. They'd never done it before. Now they're looking on the internet and guess what? They find nothing about it.
Mhm.
So there is no help from other side as well. Because as you said, nobody's talking about not many Christians. Maybe some Christians sometimes they mention of the
Mhm.
Torah and some of the vague stories here and there, but not as systematically as we find out. And we have long experience of dealing with different Muslims, different sect of Muslims, Shia, Sunnis, Ahmadiyas, and they are so different among themselves. But since we tackle the common issues, we don't need to prepare different methodology for each one of them.
Mhm.
This one is working
Mhm.
for like that's why I call the master key or universal key. It's kind of opens every single door. It doesn't matter what.
Mhm.
It's common denominator. We're tackling the most, but they are most important. This pillar is the one of the most important. And next three lectures, we talk about three other pillars, which is as paramount as important of importance for them as well, right?
Yeah. So what we'll do is we're going to do another video that's a longer version of the story.
Yeah.
Might not be like a ton longer video, but it will be a longer version of a story because we're kind of recapping the same stuff, but we're expanding it because we're going back to the beginning, going to the beginning of the Quran story of Joseph.
Yeah.
Pretty much just a little bit after what we read today. So, um, I when I can sit down like Alex is saying, like we can do it in different settings. So in different settings, you have more or less time. So you basically want to know how to do it with the shortest amount of time, and then also if you had as much time as you could have, what could you lay out ideally. So I've kind of had more experience in the latter, trying to do that, sitting down with somebody, having, some hours to walk through material and just, have a more normal paced conversation than like trying to give them as much as you can in however much short a time on the street. But both are valuable. So we want you to know how to do both, especially because you may not, you may be more oriented to one or the other. Yeah, and it's what we also really want to encourage you to do is really learn the story of Joseph in Genesis and in the Quran overall. So even beyond what we teach you about, we would really encourage that, because it is just so it's a long story in both. It's not that long in the Quran, but it's 100 verses basically.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know that story well, the better you know that story, the more you'll just be, you could sit with them for, many, many sessions if you wanted to,
Yeah.
if they were open to it. So, yeah.
But we have interesting pattern. It either we have 2-3 sessions with a Muslim.
Yeah.
Either he turn like away from Islam and hopefully coming to Christ, or they cancel the next meeting.
Yeah. Usually most of the time it's one, but yeah. sometimes you get 2 or 3, but
and this methodology is actually you have to use it with a humility and respect,
yeah.
because like you have like sledgehammer and they have like piece of glass. You can easily destroy everything, because we have the most powerful scripture compared to the Quran. Like a Torah is like is ultimate killer of the Quran. And in order to do the job right, we have to be polite, we have to be respectful, and we have to give them choice to make. No pressure.
Yeah.
Not we don't use our words or personality to persuade them against their like using. See what happens when you start using this approach. You'll see them most of the time. They get disoriented. They get shocked, and at this point, we could tend to press on a little bit harder.
Yeah.
And kind of make them say the words, right? And they're not ready yet. They may shocked, and they could say,
yeah. It's so, in a sense, it's so quick to get them to a point, but they're not ready yet. That's a good way of putting it.
yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like we're trying to be like very sensitive
Gentle.
to like give them space to make decision and time and think about it and pray about it, whatever they're gonna do, or they're gonna run away from it and not want to face it.
Yeah,
And
nothing we can do about it for sure. So, and I usually tell them, like, I respect your decision, no matter what you do. It doesn't matter. But it's between you and God and nothing to do with me. So make sure you'll make your peace with God tonight. Because I'm saying it out there on the internet or meeting people on like in person after I done all the 5 points and preaching gospel at the end, which is number 6. I give them a choice and explain them then clearly. If you'll die, God forbid, tonight as a Muslim or anytime as a Muslim, you will be burned in hell forever. Because 2 things: you deny the Torah as a Muslim, which is word of God, and for that you end up in hell. Second, you elevate the word of man, which is Quran, is definitely word of Muhammad. You elevate this word to the status of the word of God. The both of them are shirk, unforgivable sin. The God will never forgive you. So you have to be very careful when you make your decision. But please do it. It's on your own, nothing to do with me. And go in peace. And usually I have very good. We separate on a good terms.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, there's much more to say, but let's leave it for later videos. Yep. And we'll give the longer one soon as well. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye bye.